Wow. Well, should we take it for a spin?
Yep, sounds good. Hop on the driver's seat.
Yeah.
Hey guys, so my name's Will. I'm with the Benny New Zealand Trust and Christchurch Electric Vehicle Owners Group, and I'm here with Raf from the Top Party.
Good morning.
We're going to just have a chat about, you know, all the sort of policy, what Top's got to offer, and what the infrastructure is looking like.
How do you get a car painted like Pikachu?
So the colour is factory.
Yep.
And I just did the decals.
I mean, this is like...
You're happy?
I'm very happy. This is, yeah. Oh, this is nice. Very cool. Jeez, this is smooth. Okay. You sure you want me to drive? This is neat. It's a lovely ride, actually. How does it compare? So it's just a normal leaf?
It's just a normal leaf. Yeah. You can drive from here to Hamner Springs and get there with about 15%.
Right. Yeah. And so, what's your sense of kind of the the EV market at the moment?
Yeah, well, the clean car scheme has really helped kick it up a gear. The biggest, there's two main factors of why people haven't bought an EV.
Yeah.
Biggest one is cost.
Yeah.
It's really hard for people to sort of have the capital required to buy it, and then also a lot of people don't realise that you should never look at the price of just an EV. You should also look at your running costs of savings. So the cost of an EV should always be considered of whatever you normally spend on a car, and then 5 years worth of petrol savings. Then again, if we look at what money people have available, they don't always have the money to be able to pay 5 years of petrol up front.
Sure.
So that's the biggest difficulty. The second big difficulty is just with information. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so people don't know how long EVs batteries will last for. They also don't realize that they are good for the environment. There's a lot of misinformation out there about how, you use a battery for a couple of years and then we throw it into the ocean and it's going to poison all the dolphins, as opposed to the fact that it will continually to go around for at least 30 years, and then after that it can be fully recycled.
Is there a way of kind of putting, like, let's say, finance costs in at a cheap rate? Like if the government were to sort of...
Well, if some party was to be talking about green financing, which I believe is one of your policies, that would be really helpful. So we are seeing some movement on that from the private banks. So just this week, Westpac has announced, I think it's Westpac, has announced the 0%.
Is that right?
Yeah. ASB, my bank, is doing 1%. So this car was purchased with the help of a 1% loan for 3 years.
That's not bad.
There are at least 3 or 4 big banks that are doing 1% loans for EVs.
Wow.
All the loans I'm talking about, the low interest loans, they're all based on owning a house. So if you don't own a house, then you can't get access to those rates, and you're stuck paying car financing rates, which are about 12%.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah, so we need to be able to finance it. Essentially, if the government's doing it, they can finance it at their cost of borrowing.
Exactly.
Look, the demand is there. I think the thing about the clean car discount is it was seen as a sort of middle class welfare. Like basically, all these middle-aged guys bought Teslas.
Which is a shame, because the thing is, it doesn't matter what the car is if it's going to be in the country for a long time.
So, and this is the problem, I think, and I've seen Julianne try to say, look, this is actually about boosting the supply.
Yes.
So it is going to trickle
and
down.
It's also a signal to the manufacturers as well that they need to bring cars to New Zealand. So since we had the clean car scheme going, we've had so many more EV models announced in New Zealand, because manufacturers are waiting to say, hey, is this going to be a thing here or is it not? Because we're not going to bother if it's not. And then the other thing as well is that low-income people are the most affected by things like air quality pollution and also climate change. So by having EVs on the road, look, I mean, my personal view is that we don't need to replace every single petrol car with an EV. We just need to make sure that the cars that are coming into the country are electric, and we need to provide people with better alternatives than the only option for transport being a sole occupant vehicle.
I mean, a good example. So I looked at, so I had a car down here, and it was an old one and it kind of needed work. So I got rid of it, and I just thought, I want to buy an EV. So I looked at the EVs, but then the cost put me off. And I didn't really actually even want to have a car full stop. I needed a little runaround. So I ended up buying a $3,000 21-year-old Honda Civic, and it's good as gold. No problems at all. But when I was looking at sort of some of the cheaper lease, particularly, a friend who sort of knows a bit about this as well sort of said, you've got to check the battery number. What's it called? You mentioned
State of health.
Yes, the state of health. Because he said, that might, and some of these things were with a rebate as well. So you could actually maybe get like a sort of a 10 But it was he just said, yeah, but the battery clock's like 50%.
A couple of years ago, I bought a $7,000 Nissan Leaf.
Yeah.
So that's the one I have as my partner's car, and that is 50% state of health, and it's now down to 45%, and it gets 60 k's per charge, which is
so for inner city, that's fine.
What we know from the stats is that most New Zealanders only travel 30 k's a day.
Sure.
So your $6,000 EV is actually going to do everything you need. And if you're looking at a $3,000 car, and then you're like, okay, you're going to spend $2,000 a year on petrol, you've paid for that difference in 2 years.
Yeah, totally. So I mean, I'd planned actually get this thing, get through the election, see what happens.
Yeah.
If I get elected, I'm going to get an EV, and then get that all stored. So I thought I can probably buy this and probably sell it for the same amount in the future. But yeah, I think explaining
it's a long conversation, right?
Yeah, there's been so much stuff about essentially Tesla, so people just think, it's a Tesla and I need loads of money. But actually, the way you've explained it is really good, and it's almost like getting something online to explain to people, hey, how much petrol do you spend a week? This is what you could get.
And we do have some things like that, but it's just a lot of information, and that's one of the reasons I do what I do, to talk to people about EVs. And I'm with the Christchurch EV Owners Group, I'm with the Betting New Zealand Trust, and everything that these organisations do is to try and actually have those conversations with people, and explain it. Because like if you're new to a car, right, it's like, what is a spark plug? What do I need 91 or do I need premium unleaded?
Where do I put the oil?
Exactly.
I remember the days where you used to have to fill up your radiator.
Exactly. So all of that stuff is really confusing, but we're used to it. So we've kind of got to the point where like, that makes sense to us because it's been the norm for the last 100 years. So EVs are just a completely paradigm change, and everything is different, and it's hard for people to understand that. So it's all of those aspects that hinder New Zealand adopting EVs.
So what's our rate compared to like other?
We're currently at 1%, between 1 and 1.5% of the fleet.
So what's Norway at?
You've got total fleet and you've got new fleet. Sure. So I don't know all the stats for everything, but Norway is probably about 60% to 70% new vehicles are EV. New Zealand is about 20% new vehicles are EV. So that's really good. I think Norway, it's probably something like 20% EV total fleet compared to our 1 to 1.5. The reason why EVs are taking off now is because you're at the point where the cost of the car plus the running cost savings means that it's a cheaper option if you have access to that finance.
Yeah, that's it. So if you take the finance bit out and you make it very easy for everyone, and you have a kind of funding for lending program behind it.
What's your view on the EVs paying road users?
Currently, the legislation that we have, as far as I know, is that in 2016, National brought in this road user exemption incentive for EVs. And that was originally it was tied to 2019 on the basis that in 2019 we'll have 2% EV adoption. And in 2019 they're like, oh shit, we're still not at 2%. So we're going to extend it out until 2023 or 2% adoption. And right now we're still not at 2% adoption. And so it's kind of interesting that National Party is like, oh, this is a terrible thing, when they're the ones who put this thing in, and they also originally said the goal is 2%. We think that's going to happen in 2019. So the goal was always 2%. And the reason why 2% is because that's when the early adoption starts. Like everything before 2% is considered, in terms of like any technology adoption curve.
At 2%, everyone knows someone.
Exactly. Whereas before that, it's only the real risky people that are still willing to try it out. So once you hit 2%, then that's when you actually start getting quantities of scale. You have people that are like, okay, yeah, we feel comfortable with this concept. And that's why the RUC exemption was there. It's not a subsidy. It's not a handout to rich people. It's just to actually get this thing started. And the best way to get things started is to make it very, very compelling. If you read the letter by Simon Bridges about all the reasons why EVs are great for New Zealand and all the reasons why we need to support this technology, it's very compelling. So Simon Bridges, you were ahead of your time in 2016, but we need to stay that course. And I don't think it makes a lot of sense to change it. But at the same time, if it does change, it's not actually a big deal. We're talking about, at the moment, you're paying about 30 cents per litre, or roughly $2 per 100 Ks.
Right.
So if you add road user charges, your equivalent cost is shifting to about 90 cents per litre. 90 cents per litre is still a lot cheaper than $3 a litre or whatever it is. So EV owners are still going to be happy. It's just about, okay, well, the incentive is actually for a specific thing. So maybe it should continue doing that specific thing. But you're still going to be miles ahead regardless of whether the road is charging or not. Yeah. So you've driven EVs before?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I did when I was doing some trips to Hamilton last year, I got a Zilch from Auckland.
Awesome.
And drove down to Hamilton, charged it overnight, drove back, and it was perfect.
Yeah. And was there any part of that process that you found like surprising or?
A little, the battle for charging stations. So so I'd look up on the app where are the charging stations, and you would pull in and there'd be like 3 Teslas there, everyone trying to sort of get in.
Yeah.
And that was interesting. A couple of the charging stations were broken down, which was a problem. And I went again with my kids in the new year. Actually, we went down to Hobbiton, and again we did the Auckland trip. And actually finding charging stations was quite challenging.
Right.
And we nearly ran out of juice.
Were you using the ChargeNet app?
Yes.
Or,
yeah. And I ended up. One of the problems I found is I ended up with apps for every different charging station, and that was really annoying. But it was great. Otherwise, it was really straightforward. And I think the Zilch thing, even though there was seemed to be a one-man band in terms of the operation, was quite good.
There's a scheme that's being trialled very soon where the EECA organisation is going going to be funding a pilot for one standard for all of these different charging networks, which is the way it should have always been. But hopefully that will get us closer to one account for all the different networks.
If you put yourself in the consumer position, like mobile phones and chargers, you just want to plug in.
Yeah, well, it needs to be as easy as a petrol station, right?
And this is what I think, this is the challenge sometimes, let's say, between public and private, is that, when you look at the old telco systems, BT or Telecom here or whatever, and the lack of innovation, as soon as we opened it up, the innovation was incredible. So I think it's the same with this. If you get people innovating and you create some competition, you get technological advance.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get like a better result.
Yeah, and I think because we've been through so many tech revolutions, it's quite clear how consumers respond. They want it as easy as possible. The easier you make it, fine. Yeah. So, I've been with Vodafone for ages, and it's generally been good, and it's easy. If we look at what are the outcomes, so let's just saw that bus going past, that was the diesel. We also have electric buses on the thing. And actually, I think the electric buses are heavier because they make a big bong when they go past the house. But essentially, people still want to get from A to B. So we're saying get from A to B in the most efficient way and the cheapest way, which includes environmental costs.
Yes.
So when everything is electric, so one of our policies is electrify the urban bus fleet by 2030, because we know it can be done. It's simply a question of bringing forward the purchases.
Bringing forward the funding. And the other thing as well is that if you bring forward that funding, it's not like that funding is new funding. It's actually, you're going to be saving them. You're going to be saving running costs.
So
you're going to be saving maintenance.
You can do the same,
so it's just
same
bringing
calculations.
It forward. Same cost, but bring it forward.
Yeah, and in fact it can be cheaper, because if you go to the producers and say, okay, we want 3,000 electric buses by 2030, what can you do? They'll go, okay, we'll give you 25% discount. So rather than sort of buying a couple of hundred a year, just get a contract. And it's the same with all our infrastructure.
So as part of that policy, you also have that you want to scale up investment in charging infrastructure nationwide. Tell me about what that looks like.
Well, again, it goes back to your funding.
So would that be buses only, or would it be general charging?
No, general. Yeah, so buses and EVs. And we haven't talked that much about cars, because I think the current policy is pretty good. And it's how we deliver this, because essentially it's a capital financing issue. So I'd probably put it in the infrastructure agency and treat it like the UFB rollout. Whenever we're doing X, you put in Y.
It's a really probably practical example. Whenever the new Pegasus by Wood-End by bus gets put in, make sure there are EV service stations along that route. Well, that's part of the planning project. That you don't have to go and retrofit them in 5 years later, because oh god, somebody should have done that. But
Do you know much about the current strategy from EECA for the charging rollout?
No.
So the old strategy was a charger every 50 to 75 k's along State Highway 1 and main state highways. The new strategy is, so they've done that. That was achieved a year ago. And then the new strategy is to take that existing concept and roll out high-speed quantity charging hubs every 100 to 200 kilometers along the main state highway. And the idea is that you put in a location where it's got 20 chargers and they're high speed, and you have facilities there like restaurants or toilets or Wi-Fi, very similar to the service station model. And then you're actually able to support all of those existing cars and the new cars coming in, and also have capacity for things like trucks. Like at the moment in Taupo, there is a charging hub in where the Burger King and the McDonald's car park are.
I've been there.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously. Burger King, yes.
So I have been to the service.
So there are
burger,
2 high-speed chargers that can charge a total of 4 vehicles at a time. But at the moment, those high-speed chargers are being used by buses and trucks, and it's in a normal restaurant kind of sized car park. So you have situations where you have 2 buses, completely blocking the thoroughfare, because that's the only place they can charge in this important route going from Auckland to Wellington.
In a way, it is going back to the old service stations on the motorways.
Exactly.
I'm just thinking, okay,
but
what we're selling is different, so we don't need the big fuel stations. But get the charging stuff in now.
Yes. You said that you've got your green finance scheme, and we sort of talked about how that could potentially include EVs. Has there been any sort of discussion about that explicitly including, or are you sort of more thinking about solar panels and batteries?
Yeah, I'm open to the whole way we finance, if you like, the rewiring of New Zealand. So there's a new group now called Rewiring New Zealand, and I think let's wait and see what the plans are. In a way, I often say to people, money isn't the problem, it's actually the outcomes. So if you can show that you're going to invest X over 10 years and you'll get an X plus 5 return, but that's fine. The money isn't the issue. And I think what COVID showed, and what programs like the funding for lending showed, is actually the money is there. It's what's it going to be used for. In COVID, a lot of it just sort of splashed around, didn't go to productive uses. So
well, the interesting thing about EVs in New Zealand is that we already know that we spend about 7 billion. If the government just gave everyone an EV, right? How many years? The mathematical equation is how many years would it take for the $7 billion we save every year to pay back the funds that paid for all of the EVs?
Well, looking at some of the work that's been done in Australia, they reckon about 10 years. And then actually your costs almost go to zero.
Exactly. So I'm not saying that we need to do that kind of crazy capital usage, but I'm just saying there should be some understanding about this is a way to do it.
But what I would say to somebody, whether it's officials or groups, advocacy groups, right, come with the modelling. The financing isn't a problem. If you can show that within 10 years we can reduce our need for fuel imports by 60%. That has a huge impact on our current account financing. So it has an energy security issue. We're not so subject to overseas swings in prices.
Yes,
so we're seeing oil prices going up again at the moment. And so it's a win-win-win everywhere. And we just need the capital to fund it. Fine, government, here you go. This is what it's going to cost. Put this interest rate into your model. Does that work? Yeah, fine. That's it. I mean, we're going through in a lot of areas, in agriculture, in industrial production, in transport, all places where we're trying to reduce emissions, a transition. And there will be points at which it makes sense for the government to fund the capital aspect of it. So we've seen it with the electric furnace deal, with the Fonterra coal boiler deal. Now, of course, these companies can do it themselves, but they're not going to. Basically, most things are funding issues. So it's not that people don't want to do stuff. They don't have the capital. And that's where you go to the private markets, and capital costs are often higher. So there are lots of places where government can come in and say, we will fund it for you. And we can fund it at a lower interest rate, and we can take a longer term horizon. And those are the gaps. And I think this is what we've learned over the last 30 years, is that we've got caught in this dichotomy between public and private finance without realizing there's a place for both at different times in the cycle.
If it benefits the country, long term thinking is
Yeah, so private capital is
Yeah.
going to drive innovation. Public finance is going to provide the transition pathway. And then the private sector is, oh crikey, right, now we're going to pile into EV. So that's the future. So I'm thinking about what is, particularly for the South Island, what does the next 30 years look like? Where are we going to be in 30 years? And I see actually we will have decent train services. We will have fully electric fleets. All our power will be generated locally. We will have industries that support all of that stuff. I mean, that's a great story.
Yeah.
And then our roads will be a little bit safer. People can cycle, they can walk, whatever. That's a choice thing. But pollution will be down. Emissions will be down. It will be cheaper for people. What's not to like about that?
Yeah, that sounds really good. I've got a question for you that you probably won't answer, which is fine. Preference for which major party to support? Whatever answer you want to give to that is fine.
Look, I mean, for me, we're laying out a manifesto which is focused on the future of New Zealand. Now, I know all the parties really well, and I've had to deal with both of them over the last 10 years, and they've both got stuff that fits into our manifesto. National are much better on infrastructure, and we're much more aligned around that. They're much more focused around decentralisation, which is a big principle for us because we want to see regional government, which actually would make a lot of this stuff a lot easier. Labour are more focused around social welfare, which we're a big supporter of, but we'd like some structural changes in terms of moving towards a universal basic income. So we've got stuff in common with both sides, but from a practical point of view, it looks like it's going to be a national act government, and we want to make sure that we're part of that. And frankly, if the polls stay where they are, if you're Labour and Greens, you think, well, actually, we want top involved because at least someone will have some influence. And this is only because we wouldn't be here probably if the Greens were in the centre of politics, but they're not. They're to the left of Labour. So it means that people who care about environmental issues and climate change and shifting transport and everything else around biodiversity, and we want to persuade them, okay, if this is how it's going to be, you should throw your lot in with us. So at least you'll have a party that can sit down and talk to these guys, because we don't have that kind of antagonistic relationship with National and ACT. But we'll see what happens.
Do you think national climate change policy is going far enough, or do you feel like that would be your role in a coalition?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would push that. And like I said, I mean, we need a party in the centre who can work with either of the main parties. And at the moment, we don't have that. Well, apart from New Zealand First. But
I don't think they're a fan of climate
that's
change.
kind of, if you want to go back 40 years. Maybe go back to when trains, maybe they'll be into trains or whatever.
Well,
they did some Kiwi Rail
pro-trains.
stuff. They're probably pro-trains.
I think pro-trains in Northland.
Yeah, they're sort of, you could say they're focused on the regions which suits us. But no, I mean, if we're talking about the next 30 years, I think we are the best choice. Whoever. And I think, I've got relationships with people. We can sit down, and there is a sort of a liberal wing within National. And there's also a liberal wing within ACT. A lot of them quite like our policies because, we do look at economic efficiencies, like what is the best way to deliver this outcome. But there's also a big, weird reactionary element in ACT as well, which is a vote grabber. And who knows how that's going to work out? They're going to be a bigger party, and it's going to be different. And Labour seems to just have lost their way and have just not found a place to settle on. And we'll see what Hipkins comes out with next week. And the Greens are kind of, have gone. A lot of people are saying to me, well, the Greens are just not that really focused environmental party. They've gone much more towards sort of social issues. So I think
you feel like that's a gap for top.
I think we bring a much more kind of balanced focus. Which is probably more practical. There's a lot of issues we don't get involved in. I mean, we're focused on, people, planet, prosperity for sure. But we're focused on how do we get into a world which is going to be dominated by climate change, essentially. So we've got to change our transport systems.
Do you think that, who do you think has the strongest climate change policy out of all the parties?
Well, probably the Greens do. But the problem is they can't. They don't seem to be able to put it into action. Like if they're not in government, so what? It doesn't really matter. I mean, the Zero Carbon Act will stay.
Who do you think's got the best UBI scheme? I'm guessing top.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think we have the best policies across the board. in terms of what we focus on. And yeah, if you ask me about planning, no, I don't know. I don't have the resource to put into the RMA reforms. But I think in terms of the stuff we do focus on, I mean, the teal card obviously is a future focus policy.
I haven't even talked about the teal card, but you know, I did say that you have provision in that for e-scooter and e-bike, which is a part of electric vehicles platforms that we support. So that's really great to see.
Yeah, and of course, you know, the EV stuff is the green financing. Now, to me, like I say to people, it's like I said to people here around the community housing, money isn't the problem. If you can show me that you've got some land and you want to build some houses that you can then rent out to people, the funding can come. And I think often people put the funding first instead of actually, can you show a business proposal that can deliver an outcome?
Right.
And then if you say, oh, we can't get the money, okay, that's a different question. Cool. So I think that's something that we bring that no other party really has, and I think that's my background, having been involved in markets, but in environmental issues and in social issues, is that I have a better idea of how they all link together. And often a lot of our parties just focus on one particular thing. So I think we are a modern party, which is a sustainable New Zealand party, and it's finally, people have tried to get this sort of centre party together over the years, but they haven't had the right people. And I think now we have a really good selection of people who are not partisan, but are focused on making progress for everyone.
Fantastic. All right, well, that's a good place
Well,
to
look,
end on.
yeah, it is. Well, it's great to talk to you, and I really appreciate you reminding me about this, but it's been so awesome to drive this.